No, they're not. Not in my
So it's
state.
usually
I'm sorry?
interesting.
Well, when you gave an example, you gave an example you gave an example of sports, right? Isn't
Hmm.
there like a state regulated education program like your sciences and math? I mean, or is that still through each local school? What they can decide what to teach?
That's all through each local school district. Now, what we have had is had federal program that's come down and said, well, no, we're going to have whatever that Bush era program was, No Child Left Behind or whatever. That all of a sudden comes in. That's the opposite of the anarcho idea. That's a federal thing coming out and saying you will have students do this and this and this. And unfortunately, what that created was that causes each teacher to have to take a month out of teaching students what they're normally going to be teaching them. They have to take a month out of their short year to prepare and work on this federal testing in order to get federal funding. So that's a good example of how what I'm talking about, having the lowest organization do the work is more efficient than having this top-down entity saying, no, you will do this. And that creates this actually a lot of waste for all these schools that they have to teach to this certain test on a federal level in order to get any kind of federal matching funds. So that's a really, actually, to me, the school district thing is a good example of how the anarchist would say this lowest, and even within that, the school district doesn't tell my principal every little detail. The school district gives the principal at my daughter's high school, for example, a budget, and then he pretty much has free hand to do with that budget to hire and fire teachers and set curriculum and all that kind of thing within his building. So it's always looking to the closest to the ground level entity to decide what's going to happen, and that's the anarchy way of looking at things, is to not have some top-down entity telling you what you're going to do. It's allowing the people who are closest to the situation to make those decisions, because they're the most they're usually the most in touch with what's going on and most able to make those decisions for what kind of constituency they're working with.
I have a question for you, Raphael. In an earlier example you gave was water conservation. So where does your inner anarchist put who should control that? Because you seem to imply that should go up to a global law to make it work. So does your inner anarchist push it all the way up to a global law?
Absolutely. Because I would argue that I can turn my tap off, but my next door neighbor can turn his tap on and just run it into the gutter and waste all the water. So then all of a sudden the state has to come in and say, well, no, you can't do that. And we do that with, say, clean air laws in the United States. We say, well, your next door neighbor can't just spew pollution out of his vehicle. We're going to make a national law that says that the only way to control pollution is not to encourage everybody individually to do things, because individuals can't make that macro of an effect. So we have to impose that at a national level to say, well, the only way to make, well, because of the way government is right now, we don't have a way to implement that globally. Ideally, it would be globally, but the United States, for example, doesn't kowtow to any global authority on any of that. So,
but if the United States conserves water and all the other countries turn their faucets on, isn't that same argument that you made for individuals of how it wouldn't work?
Well, it would if China was using our water, but they're not. Our water is from the United States, and we don't import water from other countries. So the control of potable water within our borders is a resource that's within our borders. Now, air pollution is something that affects everybody globally, and so there are global initiatives to control, pollution.
Wait,
And that's
the water
something that we
thing.
should.
The water thing has me. The water thing is when you say they don't use our water, they do, right? The water isn't like the United States doesn't produce the water. The water comes from the rain, right? So
Yes.
if they're using up water and they're causing the water tables to drop, that's going to cause the water tables to drop throughout the whole world, not just in China. And then there's going to be less rain, because you got less areas of water. So that would cause us to have problems with water, right? Am I wrong?
I'm not sure about water tables. I think you're kind of maybe mixing categories of how, unless they were doing something that caused the atmosphere over the United States to not dump rain. I'm not sure if that analogy quite holds up. Maybe you got a better analogy than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how the rain cycle works, right? You get, as the clouds move over, they collect more water. So that by the time, if the clouds are traveling east, they leave China, they go over the ocean, so they're gathering more water there. And then by the time they get to the U.S., they dump the water. Well, if they're not gathering water over China, the land of China, because China is using up all its land resources, then that's going to drop less water on the United States.
Well, maybe a better way to approach it is just climate in general and talk about that as the issue. So does solving a climate problem mandate that it can't be an anarchist approach? It has to be a global approach, or it's worthless.
Is that a question for me?
Just kind of testing your anarchist view. It seems you implied that you have to kind of slide up and down this scale. So I was trying to look for example where you would actually take the position that an anti-anarchist point of view would be mandatory to solve the issue, and if that's a valid statement.
Well, I think you're still like not quite getting it. Anarchy doesn't say that it has to be on the floor and that we can't have anything on the ceiling. It's just saying that given two choices between the floor and the ceiling, if the floor works and the ceiling doesn't work as well, then we want to work towards the floor. But that doesn't mean that we can't rise toward the ceiling in order to address a problem. So that
was actually what I was exploring, because I agree with what you said. You were saying that there's you want to push it down as far as possible. So I was trying to look for an example where it to be optimal, it couldn't be pushed down even one notch, just to kind of test that point of view.
Well,
it's not that I agree with or disagree with it. It's just kind of explore it more.
Sure, and I would think that in the case of, say, our atmosphere, I think that may be an area that eventually we're going to be forced to be. Even the anarchist view is going to say the lowest reasonable level to address the problem is on a global scale, because it doesn't work addressing it at anything below that, and so that's entirely consistent with the anarchist principle.
Yeah, I think it's just when you kind of think about those terms lazily, it kind of pushes the envelope in just how you consider them at that lazy level, because it says that the anarchists would try to push up to say like the Paris Accord for the the climate problem is not enough. We need to even go higher than that. We have to demand every country sign up, not for that specifically, but for something like that to solve the problem, to even make it a viable solution. So the anarchist becomes the opposite, to say we cannot have any anarchy for this topic, in the kind of classical definition of anarchy, not how you're specifically defining it.
No, I think you're misstating what the classical definition of anarchy is. Anarchy is not just people running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Anarchy,
sliding scale.
anarchy politically is literally pushing the responsibility down to the lowest level that it works and avoiding a top-down authoritarian model. That's politically what anarchy means. In the vernacular, people think of anarchy as, you know, something like Star Trek Festival. There's like a time of the day when everybody just runs around smashing windows. That's you know, anarchy in the UK. That's not politically what anarchy is. And if anyone wants to understand sort of my view on anarchy, I somebody read works by Noam Chomsky, who's an anarchist.
Yeah, in fact, maybe I used the wrong word, not classical, but just like I was using earlier, the kind of lazy definition of anarchy, of you know, kind of, you said, like, kind of, you know, running around without, you know, any rules at all.
Yeah, I would
Again,
say that was like
looking for an example where the, you know, the true anarchist would push issues all the way up to the ceiling and what those issues might be.
I think for any political question, it's always context specific. So it depends on what issue you're talking about. You know, dog catcher is different than national security is different than global climate change. Those are all different levels of impact of conditions that require different levels of governance to deal with them, and input from the people who are affected by it. I don't think somebody from New Zealand gets to decide whether or not I pick up poop after my dog here in Seattle, for instance. So my anarchist would say, well, I think that's whether or not I pick up after my dog, that's something that should probably be done in Seattle and not determined by a global entity.
Yeah, so I guess it just depends on how big the impact is, right? Because nuclear power or whatever, I mean, I think that should be global, especially if you have a fallout, you know, and the wind can carry the fallout, you know, into Canada or Mexico or across the ocean, and, you know, so yeah, people should be able to say, hey, you know, you shouldn't be able to build that power plant with those cheap ass regulations in it. You know, it needs to be more strict because we don't want your fallout, right? So I mean, but
absolutely.
the impact of your dog, yeah, the impact of your dog crap really isn't going to affect nobody but the people around you.
Sure. And that's a good real world example. Seattle, we not only had fallout from the Fukushima disaster, but, you know, daily we're exposed to fallout that comes from China burning the United States exports our waste to China, and then China just sets fire to it and recovers materials out of it, and that chemical waste goes up into the atmosphere, and because of the jet stream, that comes over us and falls on crops in the state where I live. So to me, I think that there needs to be some sort of an international body that looks at China and says, well, you're shitting outside of your neighborhood, and you need to take some kind of action to keep your shit in your neighborhood, and it's not fair to the rest of the planet that you're dumping your shit on everybody else.
So I mean, that makes it hard then. I mean, because you still need this high government, right, to be able to address other governments, because your local government really couldn't address it because they don't have the power behind it to actually do anything.
Oh, absolutely. That's why, like, I and Noam Chomsky, we both vote for the president. We don't say that there shouldn't be a president of the United States because we only need to deal with poop on our sidewalks. We try and assign relative responsibility to the bodies that can best deal with it at the lowest level reasonable, as opposed to the authoritarian model, which says we're going to concentrate all power in one sovereign, and that one person makes decisions for everything below it. That authoritarian is the opposite of the anarchist model. The anarchist would say, let's drive it down to the lowest level that is reasonable to take care of the problem. The authoritarian says, well, no, all decisions need to be made from one central authority. And so those are the two ends of the infinite spectrum, and we don't live on either one of those ends of the spectrum. The authoritarian is pushing us towards one end of the spectrum, and we anarchists are saying, well, no, we think we need to drag it back down towards this other end of the spectrum. That's what we do.
So what, I mean, I guess what would clear it up easier for me to understand is, because you say you want the lower end and the higher end, at what point does it become a higher end? Because I've never studied this, I don't know anything about it. So where do you draw the line?
Well, okay. Well, what an anarchist would say is that, let's say I'm working on a problem in my locality, and I find that this is a problem that is beyond my scope. At that point, I kick it upstairs. The authoritarian would work from the opposite direction and say, I'm on high up here, but there's a problem with dog poop, but I can't deal with this because I'm too busy, so I'm going to kick it down. And it's going to, and see, the authoritarian, the problem is that as the authoritarian kicks it down, maybe it doesn't make it all the way down to my local dog poop law person. It gets stuck in the middle with some guy who wants power and says, oh, I can control dog poop everywhere, and I like this power, so I'm going to consolidate this power and do whatever I can do to consolidate this power. And so that power doesn't go down to the local neighborhood that wants to control dog poop. The anarchist would say, well, no, I'm down here at the ground level, and now maybe it's not dog poop, maybe it's cow poop, and now this cow poop is getting into the groundwater and it's impacting people outside of my community. So I need to kick it up to the next higher up level and see now if that next higher up level can get together and deal with this problem at that level. And so then the power rises to the height that it needs to address the problem, and then it stops there instead of, does that make sense? Because when the power starts at the top and goes down, there's a risk of it ratcheting on somebody who says, oh, I like this power. I'm not going to send it down any further because I like this higher level of power. The anarchist says, well, no, I'm going to send it up until the problem gets solved, and then there's no reason for it to go up any higher than that.
But I think Bob and I are looking at this, Kurt and I explore this issue from the same point of view, is that the criteria of where you figure out you're at the right level. Because as you said, in the anarchy or in the authoritarian model, things push down, but then you were worried that they wouldn't go down far enough. Mm-hmm. In the anarchy model, you have the exact same problem, is you're trying to push things up, but aren't you also afraid that they don't get pushed up high enough? So what's the criteria that we could actually look at, any issue and say, is it at the right level or not? Well, it's a good way to look at the problem rather than saying we're pushing down or pushing up and did it get stuck at the wrong level, from pushing from either direction.
Well, from my point of view, I would say that, the problem with coming down level is that this is coming from this higher level of power trying to retain power, and it's going to tend to keep it from going down far enough. And as the power pyramid goes up, those are fewer and fewer and fewer people. From the anarchy level, it's the power is starting at the ground level and it's community. And I just tend to rather trust more that the people, say, in my neighborhood are going to be better qualified to make a decision about whether or not we want dog poop in our neighborhood than somebody from, say, the United Nations saying that I need. And I think our default is that if there's an issue for us in our neighborhood, we would rather it be addressed by the community than imposed from the outside, and it's
Can
just better to it's better to default from this, from my community point of view, and I'd rather underpower something than overpower something as a default.
Yeah, but couldn't you get the same effect when you kick it up to somebody? Somebody could just say, "Hey, I think I'm powerful enough. I know I should probably kick it up, but no, I want more power, so I'm going to hold it here, and I'm going to make a new power ring with me being the one." Right? Couldn't that happen?
Exactly. My point is that, in fact, like you said earlier, is the United States doesn't kowtow to other nations when it comes to several points. So it's power gets stuck at any level because it's human nature not to want to give up power that they have, either up or down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was gonna make a point. It was easier to push things down and delegate, but then I realized that is not true either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it still seems the same.
best way to approach the problem is, go on, Bob.
Yeah, like I was just gonna, like I said, it still seems the same problems. Either way you go, you're gonna have somebody who wants to gain control, and they're gonna stop it from going up to the next level where it should have went, and they're gonna try to control it. I mean,
sure.
So you always need someone above them. Yeah. So I don't see how the bottom up does anything to make it better. I mean, I guess I just have to see statistics that show that going from the bottom up causes less control factors than going from the top down.
Oh, you can look around you and you can see it. It is in front of your eyes. You can't tell me that, say within your family, that you decide what you're going to have for dinner is not better determined by asking the people within that family than whether or not you go to the United Nations and ask them what you should have for dinner tonight.
No,
you can't tell me that.
All families are functioning in that way.
No, because when my kids were growing up, they'd want pizza and ice cream all the time. So I'm like, no, it's not the way it's going to work. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Bob, so it's authoritarian.
Well, it's a dynamic system, and all I'm arguing for is that if you're going to move a dynamic system around, you have to have both sides of a dynamic, right? So I'm advocating for one side of the dynamic.
Yeah,
that's why I was wondering if the better approach wouldn't be to figure out the kind of criteria for being at a level, rather than saying I'm going to push up or push down, to say when. Is there a way that we actually could say, this brand new problem that we've never thought about before? Could we figure out which level it should be without having it start at the top or the bottom, and then transfer through all the levels on its way to its landing spot? Or does it have to be a kind of an evolutionary process where it keeps failing at the wrong level until it finally gets to the level it should be, kind of through like a natural selection type of mechanism?
Well, as an anarchist, I would say that my preference would be is that it start with me and it work its way up. It start as me as an individual, and then it expands from there, and that's the preferable way than to say, okay, here are all these problems, let's funnel it to the very apex of the pyramid, the top, the king of the world, and have that person make a decision as to how things are assigned and have it flow downwards. And I think if you look at how society works, the way things best work is when they initiate and work up from ground level movements. I think you can look at any political, societal, civil type of engagement of any kind, and you'll see that the ones that work best are those that start at the bottom and work their way up to the level of their competence, as opposed to something that comes from an edict down on high. I can't really think of very many examples of anything that starts off from the peak of the pyramid and works its way down. Look back to how did we get civil rights in the United States? Well, The president of the United States didn't wake up one morning and say, well, we're going to have civil rights and I'm going to force this down to the country. The country came up and it rose as a groundswell from down below and worked its way up into larger and larger institutions until it impacted the entire country and we had change. I think if you look at literally any valid situation, civilly, governmentally, societally, the ones that work start from the bottom and work their way up to their natural level of when the problem is solved best. And it's not, I'm not saying it's a perfect system. All political systems are an ideal. It's just that there are certain people that are working on it from an ideal authoritarian side, and I just think that it's important that there be advocates for the other side, so that when we meet in the middle, there are people working against the authoritarian model when we meet at that central location.
And you don't think the United States has that model now? The reason we got the government we have is you had a bunch of states, and they and they came together, and they allowed, basically they stepped into the union thing, and right. So and they realized that the government we have with the president and the Senate, and you have all these different people making the laws, and not just one person making the law. So we did kind of cap it off we kind of capped that pyramid off at like say 3/4 full, and we don't have a single governing body up there that controls everything. I mean, what would you get rid of out of the government we have today?
Well, I would say that, okay, this is what I'd say. I would say two things. One, I would say that the way I think the founding fathers set it up was an anarcho principle, where they had, they had a president that had limited powers that went over the entire country, and then you have a larger body that is below that controls more localized, and then within that framework of the United States, you have individual states which are closer to the bottom, that have individual laws. Like say in one state I can be driving at this speed, and in another state I can at this speed, and now we're going down within these. Those agencies, those bodies are closer to the ground, and then within counties we have cities, and those are even more dispersed, more closely related to the people. So I think the way the United States was set up was actually use those anarcho principles. Now the problem is that we're somewhere in the middle there, and we're constantly having this push back and forth. Where does the power balance lie? And for instance, in the United States, we have, say, corporations have an awful lot of power, and so they're pushing their power down into the local level and trying to tell me what to do. And so from my local level, I'm pushing back on that. So like I said, it's a dynamic system, but in order for it to be a dynamic system, there has to be the anti, top-down group. I'm a member of that anti-top-down group. I believe that things should start from the bottom, and somewhere we meet in the middle.
It might be interesting to take some more kind of emotionally charged issues and kind of explore them with some of the states' rights kind of discussions that are going on today, like around just to pick some exciting ones, like abortion, same-sex marriage, gun rights. Those best solved like at the state level, local level, national level.
Well,
See,
as an anarchist, I would say you would start at the state level, and then let's step back to, like, say, civil rights, which is an example of that process and that's already gone through.